Welcome to the Successful Nonprofits Podcast. I'm your host, Dolph Goldenberg. Listeners, today we are bringing you Dan Schepleng, and we are going to be talking about marketing trends and marketing examples that are actually working today. Before we do, two things I want to make sure you know about. The first, and you hear this about 1 out of every 5 or 6 episodes, this is the last episode I'm recording today. We batch record this podcast, and the last one is always the best. The first one I'm kind of warming up. Midday, sometimes I yawn because, it's midday stretch. But the last one, in fact, I was just saying to Dan, our guest, the chicken's already in the pot upstairs. I'm looking forward to dinner in about 45 minutes when Frank comes home. The last one, always the best. So you are in for a treat. Now, before I introduce our guest, Dan Schepleng, let me just remind you that we have a strategic planning webinar coming up on Thursday, April 14th. So make sure you go over to successfulnonprofits.com and check out our strategic planning webinar. We get all kinds of questions from prospective clients and sometimes just, other nonprofits that are like, hey, we don't think we're going to be able to hire you, but we've got questions about strategic planning. We're always happy to answer those, but we have taken all of those questions and created this webinar so that you understand what strategic planning is, what your board's role is, how you find the money to do it, all of those things that are really important for you to actually be able to do strategic planning. So again, that's Thursday, April 14th, and you can register at successfulnonprofits.com. Now, let me introduce to you Dan Schepleng. I think you know that I do a good little bit of research on everyone before they come on the podcast. And when I researched Dan, I was struck by several things. The first is nearly every job title that he has ever held includes the word creative. Sometimes it's creative director, but it almost always has the word creative in it. And so currently, Dan is the president and chief creative officer. Remember, I promised you it's going to have creative in it. First chief creative officer at Kapowza. And you might be asking, what's Kapowza? Well, Kapowza is a creative agency. They serve nonprofits and for-profits in video, digital, and print medium. And I've spent a good little bit of time, in addition to all the other things I've Googled about Dan, a good little bit of time at Kapowza's website. And I have to share with you, it's an incredibly fun place to spend an hour. If you've ever asked yourself, hey, how can I create a website that's really engaging? Kind of makes people chuckle a little bit, but also makes people want to click on something else, you should really go check out Kapowza's website. It's amusing, it's informative, it's inspiring. It's really worth the hour of your time that it might take for you to really thoroughly enjoy their website. So, hey, Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Now, when I was at your website, I saw a foundation video that you had done. I think it was the Ullman Foundation video. And it's listed as one of the things you are proudest of.
Yeah. So first off, thanks again for that awesome introduction. It's pretty helpful when you make up most of your titles to have all that in there. So a lot of the companies I started, so I was just like, creative sounds cool. So, but I definitely appreciate the props. So the Ullman Foundation is a nonprofit in Baltimore that serves younger adults with cancer. And so that was like a hole in the market they found. There's older folks, there's folks, children that have cancer, and this is that middle ground. And so it's a young adults kind of place. And they came to us wanting to do a video, but not having a lot of budget to do it. And because I have creative in my job title, we had to figure out how to do something quote unquote creative with the budget, because it was something that we really believed in. And for us, everything starts as a writing project. And so we I did a lot of research. I went through Reddit. I read a lot of letters, and it was really emotionally tough stuff that I just can't imagine having to deal with this. And so we realized that, if we just told a good story, it doesn't matter about the production budget. So we got a phone, we got my phone, we got one of their members, and we basically just put a script together, and we walked through Baltimore, and I filmed it on my phone, and Jess is her name, She has metastatic breast cancer, and she's in her early 30s, I think. And she's just an incredibly warm, amazing person. And we had a lot of fun just kind of collaborating on the quote unquote set, but it was basically just, me with a phone, and I brought a lighting guy, what we call a gaffer. And we didn't really use many of the lights, but we just walked around with a phone and a story, and then I cut it together and put music to it. And there was a couple of reasons it's always been kind of my favorite thing. It was for a good reason, which is why we love working with nonprofits. It's just, you want to go above and beyond. You want to see them succeed and do what's best, because the mission is so important. And it's not just, we want more customers, which is a valid mission. And we certainly have clients like that. And that's totally fine. But there's always something more powerful with a nonprofit. And so being able to take part in that, being able to work with Jess, and just like, we've had the big sets, the big crews, the trucks, the cameras, the lights, all of the toys, all of the filmmaking toys, but just stripping it down to just a cell phone and making the cell phone part of the story. Because the idea was that she was filming this herself, and it was a year in her life. And so the cleverness of that I really liked, and also who we got to work with and what we were doing it for. It was like all of the perfect things all in one.
And I've also kind of have to describe the video a little bit more for listeners, because it's kind of bookended by birthdays. So the year in her life, you see her and friends out at a bar, and it's a birthday, happy birthday, and they're toasting and they're having a good time. And then it's bookended because then at the end, she's in a hospital. And it's again, another one of her birthdays, and her friends come in with a birthday cake and say happy birthday, and she blows out the candles. And it's really just such a powerful, and I mean, it's only like, I think 90 seconds long. It's such a powerful piece, and it's incredible to think that it was shot with like a cell phone camera.
Yeah. And we also used a field recorder, because people will stand for bad video. They won't stand for bad sound. And we ended up not needing it either, because
Wow.
we just put the music over it, and it was just the authenticity of it. And it was so real and honest. And as soon as you see, an image that is obviously professionally graded and put together, there's instantly an expectation. But then you see something like this, and it's a little bit more honest. And so it's not always the best solution, but it's certainly a solution, and it was a lot of fun to work on.
And I love that you really bring that out, that when you see something that's so polished, you're like, okay, yeah, this is professionally done. But especially for a nonprofit, like I'll share with you, when I saw that video, my impression was, oh yeah, this is someone who was served by the organization, and literally like it's a cell phone camera, and you can see they just took some shots from different points in this person's life from the last year.
And the thing is, when we like commercials, no one ever says, unless me or in the circle that I hang out with, man, I saw this commercial the other day, and boy, they had a great shot and a great camera move, and it was really smooth. Now, that is absolutely conversations that I have, but it really comes down to the story. And the great thing about nonprofits they are very story rich and often execution poor, where large corporations are the opposite. They're execution rich, but story poor. So Coca-Cola pays millions of dollars, billions of dollars in some cases, to make sure that that they sell happiness. And they do a lot of work around that. And a nonprofit usually has a great story and a great why. And it doesn't always have to be polished. It just has to be honest. And so when you see a commercial or an ad or something where it's just like, this $10 billion brewery donated $250,000 and then spent $10 million on a commercial promoting their donation to this nonprofit, it serves everyone. Everyone's happy because they get what they need. But what the corporation is doing, it is borrowing from the story of the nonprofit, because they are story poor, but execution rich. And so they're able to do that. And so most of these nonprofits that we work with, they have such incredible whys that it's always predicated or inspired by someone passing on, or someone's struggling, or they saw a hole in society. And it's always really just powerful to work on.
I'm really fascinated. First, I love this metaphor of nonprofits are story rich and execution poor. One of the things I'm curious is, do you find that most nonprofits are actually execution poor, i.e. they don't have the resources for execution, or maybe they could pull off a better execution, but they don't know how to go about doing it?
It certainly depends on the nonprofit, but I do know that, I don't know when this comes out, but in a couple Sundays, we're going to see the Super Bowl. And a lot of those corporations on the Super Bowl, they're wonderful. Most of the time, it's wonderful work and it's amazing commercials. And everyone should be super proud to be in the Super Bowl as an agency or anything like that. But they obviously have millions to spend, and millions upon millions to spend on the ad time, and they can pay to be interesting. Nonprofits don't have that spend. And that's what I mean. It's poor in terms of budget, not necessarily in terms of execution. And so the execution is they can hire Seth Rogen to show off their cell phones. They can't do that with a nonprofit. Now, sometimes you get a celebrity that is involved and they donate their time, but it's always because of the story, and because they're so story rich. But oftentimes nonprofits are no different than any other business in terms of their marketing and execution. The only difference is the ask and the why. In both cases, you're asking for something. It's either a donation or a volunteer, or awareness is another good one. But they're still businesses and they're still being marketed. And no matter what the marketing is, it's still an interruption. Even if it's something I care about, you have to prove to me that I should care about this, or make it powerful enough that I should care about this. And what I always say is that it's just nonprofits just have so much in the bank of power, whether it be stories of people they helped, stories of people they want to help, personifying what it is they do in a single story. There's a ton of stories there versus like how this company got started and they figured out a good recipe for beer and now they sell lots of beer. Like we all, I don't mean to trash on for-profit businesses, but there's a lot of doctoring that needs to be done to make that story more interesting, versus like, my mother died of breast cancer. I felt a calling to leave my corporate job to start this agency or start this nonprofit that supports mothers going through cancer and offers daycare services. And nonprofits are the backstops of society. They're filling a role that for-profit businesses and the government or whomever else can't fill. And so nonprofits step up and do it. It's not necessarily profitable, but it's usually important work, most often important work. And talking about that important work is certainly something that it's easier to do when it's already there and it doesn't have to be manufactured.
And so part of what I wonder then, if nonprofits are really story rich, but the for-profits are execution rich in terms of dollars, what are some of the non-financial ways that nonprofits can gain a competitive edge in the execution?
I think the biggest thing is figuring out your resources in terms of time. We all have the same amount of time. We all have the same 24 hours. We should all be sleeping 8 hours. So you're really talking about, or more in some cases. And so we all have the same amount of time, and corporations can pay others time to do these tasks. And if you don't have that in a nonprofit, really looking at the time that you have, and more importantly, looking at what you're good at. If you're a good writer, then maybe blogs are for you. If you're a good speaker, maybe podcasts are for you. If you like photos, maybe Instagram is for you. Everyone is good at something, and everyone is a fan of something. And if you like videos, then maybe TikTok is for you. And also it's a consideration of where is your audience and things like that. But we all have tons of people we follow on social media that are good photographers on Instagram. They're just friends that take good photos, good at updating their life through Facebook, good at small thoughts on Twitter. Sometimes they have a blog. And just picking one you feel most comfortable with. You don't have to be good at it yet, but being most comfortable. I'm not comfortable taking a camera or taking my phone and putting the camera in my face. Like that feels very uncomfortable and unnatural for me. But some people, they love it. They love the selfie. And I don't think I've ever taken a selfie that was ever my own idea. But I don't mind speaking, and I don't mind going to events and being on awesome podcasts like this. And that's what's comfortable for me. And everyone's different about what they're comfortable with. And so first step is figuring out what you're comfortable with. And usually it's what you're a bigger fan of. So I've found that if you spend all day on TikTok watching videos, you could probably make a pretty good TikTok. But if you spent all day watching TikTok and then you want to write a blog, it's not like it may not be your thing because you're not reading enough. And so being familiar and comfortable in the medium in which you want to contribute to is also important. And then just being honest and telling your story. Why did you start this? Who did you start this around? What are you serving? What do you need? What's interesting about this? And asking, who cares? Even though they should care. That's the difference between nonprofits and for-profits. Like in nonprofits, people should care, but they still don't have to. And why should they care? And having friends, a good sounding board is always helpful. Hey, does this make sense to you? Or look at my last 10 posts. Is this resonating with anyone? Because I could go on and on about, the different, writing techniques and different things like that. But I know that like 10% of people might find that interesting. And so figuring out what your audience reacts to is also helpful, but just telling that story.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I saw in a print interview where you actually had said that, you'd said, ask who cares before putting anything out.
Yeah. That sounds, if it's in print, I guess I said it.
Well, admittedly, and I will also share with you when you were talking about, okay, figure out what you're really good at. Are you good at writing, then blog? Are you really good at speaking? Then go on podcasts or start a podcast. I also watched, I think it was a video interview of you where you were really talking about depth over breadth. And you had some great advice about social media and ways in which you want to leverage that.
Listening first and figuring out what is normal for that community and figuring out what you're naturally drawn to. Like I know video content is what I'm more naturally drawn to, or video or audio visual content. I listen to podcasts, books, I watch videos. I'm not going to be a huge blog reader. And so therefore, I'm not going to be a good blog writer. I can probably write a blog if I have to, but it's not where I'm naturally going to fall into. And so learning the space is probably the most important. Learning the rules of Instagram, learning the rules of Facebook, and just how people communicate and what upsets people, especially on Reddit. Reddit's a very, very finicky place. And if you don't know the rules, you're not really going to have much success there. What I would like to see people do is just learn the platforms and then post. I need to get away from perfectionism and realize that, if you post a handful of times a day, somebody may only see that once just because there's so much going on. There's so much being posted and there's so much running through. And so learning the space and following smart people and people that are good at it is the best way to learn. And then not being very sacred about what you post, just being honest.
So there's a couple things that you and your company are doing really well. Oh, that's not true. There's many things you and your company are doing really well, but there's two things that I want to talk about. And specifically, I want to talk about them and ask what your advice is for nonprofits. And so the first one, your website. Off the chain good. Like I actually did spend close to an hour on your website because I'd be like, I really enjoyed one page. I'm like, oh, let me click on this and see the next one. And by the way, I don't set aside an hour per guest website. So I kind of blew through, you mentioned we all have a limited amount of time. I kind of blew through more time than I thought I was going to, but that's the sign of a good website. So what advice do you have for nonprofits that are either creating a website for the first time, which probably means they're a new one these days, or want to do a major overhaul of their website?
Well, first off, thanks for spending all that time. That's certainly going to help our Google analytics for the month. Someone's going to be like, who spent 45 hours on the website? So first off, I can't take credit for the website. We have a great team of brilliant designers and brilliant creative people led by our creative director, Andre. And so I just have to say that at the top, that they made a great website, and my job was basically, this looks great. So as an owner, I'm really lucky to work with some super talented people. I know people say that all the time, but it definitely seems to be the case here. Everyone's very nice and very talented. But I think the biggest thing is focus. What do you want me to get out of this website? And imagine, the website is a person and they walk up to you in a room, and what are they wearing? What do they smell like? What do they laugh at? Are they funny? Are they engaging? Are they right into the sale? Sean, my business partner, and we used to joke about this guy. I won't say his name, but he used to go to every event and just hand people cards. And it was just nonstop handing people cards. And our joke was to see how many of his cards we could get before he remembered he already talked to us. And I have about like 7 of them.
I got to break in real quick. This is how I feel about LinkedIn, and I'm a power user on LinkedIn. And I often say to, on the podcast, hey, connect with me on LinkedIn. I want to be connected with you on LinkedIn. But I'm always baffled. At least 5 times a week, I will accept a connection on LinkedIn, and I immediately then get a LinkedIn message from the person saying, hi, I really want to schedule some time with you to talk about you buying a new phone system or whatever. And I'm kind of like, would you like go to a party? And
would we accept that in real life?
Yeah, like, would you just walk up to someone and be like, hey, I'm so glad you just looked at me across the room. Are you interested in buying a new phone system? No.
And I think we also have to be honest about how we like being sold to. Like, have any of us bought anything through a spam call or junk mail? Like, if you have, then okay, good for you. But you're one of the you're in the minority. And yeah, it's imagine every piece of marketing is like this invisible person that is now becoming visible. And like, what are they wearing and how are they talking? A great way to get somewhere on LinkedIn is, hey, how's it going? Like, how many people have just sent that message to you? Because they've sent 0 of those to me. I get nonstop. You want to hire us, outsource to this, outsource to that. And it's never individuals. Like, I always respond well when it's like, hey, I just started an agency. I had some questions. I'm always like, yeah, sure. I'd love to talk about that stuff. But no one ever asks like, hey, how's it going? And like, how do you do it? Like, because that's what you would do in real life. You'd have a drink, you'd walk up to an event and you'd be like, man, so how about that shrimp cocktail here? You know what I mean? And so the website's the exact same way and should be viewed as an extra employee. Our creative director, Andre, says that a lot, is that your website should be an employee. And what are they saying and how are they doing it? And we do a lot of website audits, actually, where we will go in and we'll put together, like, here's what your site is actually saying, but here's what it should be saying. Here's how it should be reorganized. And focus is the biggest thing. I like trying to come with everything at once. And I think our site could absolutely be better. Every site could be better. There's no such thing as a perfect website.
I love this concept. Think of your website as an additional employee. It's just an employee that works 24 hours a day and is always available.
It never calls out sick. Well, unless the server goes down, which is like most servers have like 99% uptime. So it's an extra employee, and it's an employee that you can put the words in their mouth of how they will speak about your organization. And then there's also technical things. Load times are big. Understanding SEO. Some places go nuts with SEO, but building a good site, making sure it's technically sound, and making sure the mobile site loads fast enough and the images aren't too big and nothing's broken. That's usually a great place to start. I've personally been blown away by things like Squarespace and Wix. Like, Wix has actually gone, like, if you don't have any budget, you got to build it yourself. Wix is actually really nice. I had to use it recently for something, and I was kind of like snooty about it, going, oh, I guess we'll try this. Because I tried Squarespace, and I the first agency website was built on Squarespace, but I hadn't used it in years. But then I built something on Wix, and I was really impressed. It really impressed. And so that's also a good option there too. And there's plenty of education out there on how to add a page on Wix, how to do this on Wix, like what is a good site. And the same thing with learning social media. Go to websites. What do you like? What do you not like? What's working for you? For your quote unquote competitors. I know it's weird to say competitors in nonprofit, but who your counterparts are. And so what are they doing? What's normal in your industry? And things like that. All things that I would say with a website.
Nice. Very nice. And it's, I'll share with you, I actually have a client right now that is in desperate need of a website redo, and they're planning on using Squarespace, in part because it is simple enough that they know that, whoever they hire does not have to have web expertise, like whichever employee is going to manage it, will not have to have web expertise. All they'll have to do is essentially know how to use the internet.
Have them look at Wix. I don't know. I was really blown away by it. Like the design, the things you can do design wise with Wix. I was really impressed.
Very, very cool. So the other thing, Dan, that I think your company is doing so well, and now watch you again say, well, there's other people that do it, so I don't know how much I can share. But as I said, this is the last one of the day. You get real Dolph. You get real Dolph, okay? But,
I can tell you what I think they do.
Exactly. But so I also was super impressed with your monthly newsletter. And so listeners, I just want you to know, Kapowza does a monthly newsletter. It's not a weekly, but it was good enough that I read one issue. God, I spent a lot of time on this. So I read one issue and I was like, oh, I need to read the next one. Oh, what did they say the month before that? What did they say the month before that? And before I knew it, I was like 12 issues in. Which, that's a really engaging newsletter. I actually have subscribed. I'm going to enjoy opening it up every month. I also sent it over to the person on our team that's responsible for our newsletter. And I was like, hey, I'd love to talk to you about this sometime and just get your thoughts. But you have an incredible newsletter. So what advice do you have for nonprofits to create an engaging newsletter that if someone stumbles on, they'll be like, oh, let me go read all the prior issues for the last year?
First of all, thanks for spending all the time on our stuff. I think between you and my mom, that'll be the most viewed, our largest audience for the month. So the newsletter started, I hate to do it again, but it started, my partner, Sean Sutherland. He is our marketing, he does all our new business stuff, really smart guy. And he said, hey, I think we should do a newsletter. And I had zero faith. I said, there's no, who cares about a newsletter? No one cares about a newsletter. And this was years ago. And he said, I don't know, I would give it a shot. I said, sure, what's the harm? Go for it. And sure enough, we've done Super Bowl commercials. We've won an Emmy. I have to talk about the newsletter more than anything else. And I'm always happy to eat my hat. He was absolutely right. And I can say it again publicly. But I think there's two things that I think we collectively did well. A, we were willing to try it. And there's very little downside to a newsletter aside from time. We were willing to try it. And we tried it for long enough to get good at it, but long enough to see if it was really worth it. It wasn't something that I was 1,000% sold on, but a quick thought of well, why not? It's one more way for people to get a hold of us or just see what we're up to. And the second biggest thing is who cares? And so, it was all written around the idea of who cares, anything with our website or anything that we try to put out on behalf of our clients or behalf of us. It's a lot of who cares. I know I subscribe and then unsubscribe to a lot of newsletters where I just don't care. And Sean also has a great comedic style that I think is really fun because, we're not a CPA firm. We're not doing brain surgery. We are a marketing firm with a pink logo and a name that sounds like a clown college. And so we're able to be interesting in a way that makes sense for us. But the biggest thing is being interesting. That is the core there and trying it. We weren't good initially. But he got good over time, and he just has a really great comedic style that it's his thing. And, and I have a piece of news I can share only to you and the listeners. We are debuting a new newsletter design that we just saw today. And so last year we had to do how agencies do gifts for clients every year. And we always it's always just seems so forced. And so we gave everyone a 1-year free subscription to our newsletter.
I saw that, by the way. I 100% saw that newsletter and I loved it.
Yeah.
Because, when you go back and look at the archive, you can see what the subject is. The subject was your holiday gift or your 2022 gift enclosed, and you open it up. Congratulations. You get a free year of our newsletter.
And I think the year before that, we set up a store on Shopify that was all the swag we had gotten at conferences, and we were trying to sell it. And we were going to donate the money to a Barks, a local nonprofit that works with animals. But we were trying to sell like a Coca-Cola branded notebook that we had got at some conference. And so it was the swag store. And then I think the year before that, or we made a streaming service. Maybe it was April Fool's. We made a streaming service called Kapalza Plus. I think it still exists. I think it's kapalzaplus.com. And it's just all our commercials, but it looks like a streaming service. And it's just like, because it all starts as a funny conversation where I'll say, what if there was a streaming service that was only commercials? How stupid would that be? And then it was like, we have a bunch of commercials. It wouldn't be hard to spin up a Squarespace site where you have let me see if it's still available. If you can build a streaming service using just images and stuff, and it just takes some time. And then we were able to it's still up, kapalzaplus.com, introducing the streaming service nobody asked for. And it all comes down to why not? Just experimentation. And I think we're seeing that a lot these days. You see it a lot with companies like Ryan Reynolds' company, Maximum Effort, where they view marketing as kind of a playground or a toy to be played with. And the public's attention is something that has to be earned by being interesting. And sometimes that's playful and it's honest to the brand. That's honest to us. There are plenty of nonprofits probably listening to this that probably couldn't go and do silly logos and funny things and things like that. Like comedy's not in the cards for them, and that's totally fine. But that doesn't mean they can't be interesting. And that doesn't mean they can't try things and experiment and do things that they find interesting, because most of the time their audience will find it interesting too.
I could not agree with you more. The only thing I would maybe try to tack onto that is, even when you're dealing with a serious subject, there are places in your newsletter where you can have fun. And let me say, sometimes that might backfire. I've said this before on the podcast, but hopefully it was 100 episodes ago, so not everyone has heard it before. When I was early, when I was a baby fundraiser, we did an annual campaign, and we used to do a phone-a-thon every year for people that had not yet given. Typically, October, November, December, somewhere around there. Mm-hmm. So we came up with this really fun, tongue-in-cheek idea that we meant as a joke. And by the way, this is really pre-internet, so we did this by mail. So we sent a postcard to everyone who'd not yet given, and it was, no, I'm sorry, we actually sent a letter, because of course there was a reply envelope in there. And so we sent it out to everybody, and we're like, hey, we really hope you're going to make your end of year gift. But if you don't worry. And we were a little nice in this, like, don't worry, we have a phone-a-thon scheduled for whatever, October 23rd. And just so you know, we scheduled it for 6:30 in the morning. But then we even put something like, no, we're just joking. We got hate mail. We actually, not many, we got 2 or 3 letters where donors were like, if you call me at 6:30 in the morning, I will never give to your organization again.
Donate to make the calls stop, please.
But we were a serious family service agency that dealt with, mental health issues and hunger and homelessness and that type of thing. But even then, I do think, and maybe we pushed that envelope a little too far, but it's possible to have fun.
It's possible I would say it's always possible to be interesting. There's no excuse to being boring, and there's no excuse to, people like, nobody wants to do anything with our stuff. Well, nobody wants to read our newsletter. Nobody wants to watch our video. Well, is it any good? Is it? And most of the time it's not. And most of the time it's a really good stuff, really good newsletters. People talk about them, and it becomes part of the conversation. And, if it's not your specialty, that's okay, but you can't be upset with the results if it's not interesting. And with that donation, the thing that you did, sure, you got some hate mail for it, but also it's kind of interesting. And so it's a fine line. Comedy is a very, very fine line. And I do think that comedy is a very radioactive. It can power a city, but it can also, melt through the ground. And so I don't want to say leave it to the professionals, but have a professional opinion to see if because especially with nonprofits, if you're dealing with hardcore, serious issues, important issues, that comedy fine line can really go the other way. So I would just err on being interesting and using comedy when you can, but just be careful with it. I've seen it backfire.
That's fair. That is certainly fair. Dan, I just looked down. I was like, oh my gosh, where did all this time go? Because I actually I've not left enough time really for the off the map question. But thankfully, we're not a radio show, so we don't have to close right at
I thought this was 4 hours.
Past. Oh yeah. We're a long form podcast now, listeners. Yeah. Strap in for.
You know, it'd be funny if all of your podcasts were 30 minutes and one was 4 hours and there was no explanation.
So I will share with you one of my favorite podcasts. Listeners oh, come on, Dolph. Move on to the off map question now. One of my favorite podcasts. Actually, they produce 5 and 6 hour podcast episodes.
Is it Hardcore History?
Yes, it is. Boom. Yeah, I love Hardcore History, but it's a commitment. And by the way, yeah. I like them so much that some podcasts we don't do Patreon on this podcast, but some podcasts do Patreon, and Dan Carlin does. I give Dan $1 for every episode that he drops because first, he does not drop that many, and second, it's
they're good.
Yeah, it's 5 or 6 hours of high quality research and audio, and yeah. So I'm okay, that's worth more than a buck. Yeah.
Yeah. It's basically a book. My favorite is, I have some friends that we love Hardcore History. Although I haven't listened to one in a while. We used to do Dan Carlin commenting on everyday things. And so if you can imagine that's a fun way to take something so serious.
Well, there is actually, and admittedly comments more on politics, but there's a Dan Carlin Common Sense as well, which is a little bit shorter. Those are, I think, 2-hour episodes. But that's long form podcasting.
It's a good flight and good road trip.
Yes.
But I watched where I listened to the World War I one, Blueprint for Armageddon.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Yeah.
You have to imagine yourself again. And he says again really funny, and they just latched onto that. Again and again. You
kind of sound like him, by the way. So, listeners, we're gonna link to Hardcore History in the show notes. This is really, if you like history, and I'm a total history nerd. If you like history, you are gonna love Hardcore.
Leave
history.
This podcast immediately and go listen to Hardcore History.
But just know if you do, you're missing the off the map question. So I've got a great off the map question for you, and it's expanded since I first came up with it because you helped expand it for me.
Oh, man.
So in my vast Google research on you, I discovered that you have an IMDb page. And then in my conversation with you, I discovered that I am now 4 steps away from somebody really famous. So I need you to share with us how you got on IMDb and who you're 3 steps from.
Well, first of all, who are you 4 steps famous from?
Well, Kevin Bacon.
Oh, okay. 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 So IMDb, anyone can get an IMDb. It's like getting a Wikipedia page. It's not as big of a deal as it seems. But I used to write film music before all this, and didn't want to move to LA. And so started doing marketing in the early 20s and stuff like that, and bounced around. And funny enough, I ended up moving to LA anyways, but I've really kind of fell into directing, and I came to it from film music. And so that is where most of those credits are, although I haven't looked in quite a long time. There's also a music video I directed in 2019 that I believe is up there too. So anyone can make it. You can attach yourself to any kind of movie. Now they'll disapprove it, but you can make your own you can make an IMDb account for this podcast. And just
really
and start crediting yourself. Yeah, I guess. I think so. Maybe, I'm probably wrong, but yeah. And so it's just through previous productions. And so, yeah. And with the interesting thing about commercial production is that it's the same gear and usually the same people that shoot movies or TV shows. And movies and TV shows are months on end. They're 200 days, 100 days, 90 days on set. And the average commercial is 1 or 2 days. And so these are great gigs that people that work on movies and shows take in between those larger ones. And so I get the privilege of working with the set decorator for, House of Cards, because she is in between big things and we happen to have a commercial, and she's great to come on set for a week and buy all the stuff and build a set. And so you end up, in close proximity to pretty famous people because of the crews that worked on things. And so that's all it is. But it's yet again, it's somebody else is the cool one, not necessarily me.
Well, I find it cool. I don't know a lot of people. I think I only know one or two people with an IMDb entry. So I find it super cool. Dan, I am so glad you came on. I'm especially glad you were the last episode of the last recording session of the day, because you have the perfect personality to do this kind of last recording of the day. So thank you so much for coming on. And I want to make sure, listeners, that you know how to reach out to Dan, because not only do you have to check out Kapowza's website, not only do you have to subscribe to Kapowza's email list, it really is that good. You really want to do it. But Dan has made a really generous offer. He's willing to do a free consultation and a discounted hourly rate for listeners that reach out. So please make sure you go to kapowza.co. That's kapowza.co. And there you can check out the website. You can subscribe to the email list. You can reach out to Dan. And, frankly, you can also see some really awesome videos that they've done and other really cool, incredible work that they have done. Hey, Dan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah, it was a pleasure, and it was the perfect time of the day for me as well. It was like right after my second espresso, so it was a good time.
Nice. Well, listeners, if you missed the URL, it's not terribly difficult. Kapowza.co. But if for some reason you missed it, don't worry about it. Go to successfulnonprofits.com. Or if you don't remember the name of that history podcast with Dan Carlin, Hardcore History, you could also go to successfulnonprofits.com and check out the show notes. Pretty much anything we've talked about that I said we're going to link to, we're going to link it in the show notes. Now, as we wrap up episodes, I always just want to remind you that we have a vault, I think nearly 250 episodes of other content that you could listen to. And if you found this episode fun, useful, interesting, then there are two more I want you to think about. One is Tell Your Story with Scott Hartman. You might remember Scott is the filmmaker who's been helping nonprofits and others tell their story. And I think that was episode 201. And another one, we had Adam Walker on because we talked some about websites today with Dan. And gosh, maybe 20, 30 episodes ago, we had Adam Walker on to really talk to us about doing more good through our websites. So if you're interested in either videography for your nonprofit or websites, check out those. And finally, I love it. I love it. I love it when you rate and review the podcast. I read the reviews. They make me feel good. And I also love it when you sign up for our email list. So while you're at successfulnonprofits.com, consider signing up for our email list. And by the way, if you sign up for both Kapowza's email list and ours starts to use some of the techniques they're using, hey, what can I say? It's flattery. It's absolutely flattery for Kapowza. That, listeners, is our show for the week. I hope that you have gained some insight to help your nonprofit thrive in a competitive environment. And the lawyers make me say this, even on the last recording session, even though I can smell the chicken cooking upstairs, the lawyers make me tell you that I'm not an accountant and I'm not an attorney, much to my parents' disappointment. And let me share with you that neither I nor the Goldenberg Group can provide tax, legal, and accounting advice. And by the way, also much to my parents' disappointment. Just know that this podcast and every episode of it is for informational purposes only, and you should not rely on it for tax, legal, and accounting advice. Now, I say this at the end of every episode, please, and I don't just say this about me, don't rely on this podcast, don't rely on any podcast for professional legal or accounting advice. If that's what you need, find a qualified, licensed professional. Reach out to them. If you're not sure what type of professional or what specialty you need, you can talk to me. I can probably help you figure that piece out. And if you don't know anyone who might be able to suggest folks to you, I probably know accountants and attorneys that I could suggest that you talk to. So you can always reach out to me if you're looking for a referral.